Hey, Darrell, it's a pleasure to have you here on the Simplifying Entrepreneurship Podcast today.
Pete, super excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I mean, we've set this up a while ago and haven't got a chance to dig into the conversation, but I'm really looking forward today to chatting about some marketing and chatting about how we can build that side of our businesses. And, although a lot of my background is in marketing and stuff like that, I'm not running an agency, and I know you're running an agency and you're doing all kinds of great stuff around that with your clients. We're going to dig into it a little bit today with your sort of topic of the 4 steps to get new leads that convert fast. So anxious to hear a little bit more.
Absolutely. Happy to share it and break it down for your listening audience as simple as we can.
Yeah, well, it's all about simplicity. We were chatting
right.
a little bit about that. I think we really are connected to the fact that we want to bring simplicity to the people that we work with. And, entrepreneurs are overwhelmed and overworked and all this stuff. So whatever we can do to give them an easier path and a framework and a system that's going to make sense of it all just seems to be a good thing, right?
Absolutely.
All right, man. Well, why don't you dig in? What are the 4 steps to getting new leads that convert fast?
Yeah, so I think the best way to start this conversation is to think about your prospect from the standpoint of what I like to call triggering events. When we're marketing online, when we market offline, it doesn't really matter where the channel is because the channel is agnostic to this thought process.
Yeah.
It's always about whether we can identify a triggering event in our ideal prospect's life that will get them moving in the direction to solve their problem. And I like to say that because it doesn't really matter what you sell. It doesn't matter if you sell a product or a service, or you're an expert or you're a speaker or you're a coach. Your purchaser will have some triggering event. So the job number 1, before we break down the framework really quickly, is to make sure that we spend some time for an hour or two and just jot down those triggering events. Where do you get them from? You get them from the questions that you've been asked. You get them from those discovery calls that you've ran. You get them from the search queries on Google that you can do from keyword research tools all over the internet. The triggering events will lead you to what I like to call step 1 in the framework that I call C.O.R.E, which the C stands for then creating an offer, video, or resource that can quickly solve a problem that your prospect has without your help. And this is the distinction, right?
Without
I'm going to take
your help? Yeah.
without your help.
Yeah, that's the distinction.
See, Pete, we want to sell stuff all the time, right?
Yeah.
And we feel like if we give them the solution without our help, then they will never need us. But Pete, you and I both know the vast majority of consumers are not do-it-yourselfers, right? They are not do-it-yourselfers. My business partner and I, we joke all the time. My business partner named Stormy, and he goes and shops at Home Depot because he will renovate anything in his house. If it breaks in his house, he's going to go fix it. I shop at Lowe's, so we joke. I'm a Lowe's guy because I ain't fixing it because I'm going to go right to the person and hire them and say, come with me.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay. So step number 1 is create something.
Model. Yeah.
That's right. Yeah. The vast majority of people, the vast majority of high achievers understand the value of their time. They want to understand the solution to the problem, but then they want to get out of the way, right? Exactly. They just want to get out of the way, right? So that's
do it.
That's right. Now, we don't have enough time to break down all the various ways, but your audience is savvy, right? Yeah. But I think the key is you've got to know what it is that will help them get a win. What is a quick win for them? And you should know what that is in your business. Step 2.
Yeah.
And this is what's really interesting. I audit probably north of 200 websites still a year.
Yeah.
And the vast majority, in probably the 80 to 90% range, they may have said offer. They may have said invitation for free. And I never see it offered on the website. Can't find it.
Crazy, eh?
Yeah, we'll get into a meeting and they'll tell me, oh yeah, Darrell, we created this resource or that resource. We have this video or that video. We have this webinar, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, I don't see a pop-up. I don't see a slide in. I don't see a landing page. I don't see it on your social media. I don't see it anywhere. And so step number two is you've got to find creative ways to offer it. And here's the reason why. Pete, you might hopefully agree with this, and that is that email still to this day, despite all of the popularity of TikTok and Instagram and Facebook and Google Ads and all of the socials, despite all of the popularity of those channels, and I'm a huge fan of them, we actually yet leverage those channels in this framework. The number one ROI driver to your digital marketing efforts is still your email address. You're still your email list. And here's what I mean. It is absolutely, I'm not going to get into.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, we own shoe stores, and one of my other businesses, and the most important thing that we can do is to get an email from a client so that we own that connection base, and it's up to us to own that and to make sure that we're delivering what they want through it, right? Because all the other things, the social, the Instagram and Facebook and TikTok and everything, those algorithms you don't own, but you still own the email, right? And
100%.
From that perspective, you've got to deliver the quality of the communication through there. And that's where you get your conversion, right, Darrell?
100%. You use the keyword own, right? We don't own these platforms. It wasn't about 4 or 5 months ago that Facebook and Instagram went down. Now, that's not going to happen every year. Google will have the same type of outages. All of these platforms will have an inevitable outage. Yeah. But the reality is you can't build your business on rented land, on rented soil. Mm-hmm. And listen, I talk to enough business owners throughout a calendar year to know that they are frustrated every time something changes in the algorithm. And the reality is they are in business to make money. And if you don't pay to use the product, you are the product. Now, what that means simply is this. If you don't pay a subscription fee to log into any of these platforms, then they are gathering data. You don't have to like it. I'm a consumer too. I'm kind of 50-50. I love the opportunity, but I hate the privacy issues. I'm with you. If you're in the listening audience and you're irritated, I'm not pro Zuck all day. Right. I'm just saying.
I hear you.
But we have to understand the process. So the point of the matter, though, is we've got to build that email list, which is step 2. And listen, you've got to do a lot more work today to get an email from someone because nobody wants to be on another email newsletter.
Exactly.
Ever. No one woke up today saying, let me give somebody my email address. And I see it because out of the hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of monthly, weekly conversions that come through the channels that we have to manage, I can tell you with clarity that it's starting to head upwards to 30 and 40% of people will put in a bad email address just to get the free resource because of the way we have not honored their attention after we've gotten the email address. So the days are gone when you just get an email address and put them through this hard pitched 5-part email sales sequence. You burn them out and then they will just, so I'm seeing this every day, Pete, where like the number of bounced emails in our clients' accounts, we're a HubSpot agency. So we use HubSpot and we can track this stuff very easily. And HubSpot is extremely forward about how to help us monitor those things. But the number one thing is you've got to have engagement, which actually, Pete, leads me to step 3. And that is everybody won't take your offer. Right? You should be looking for 1 to 2% conversion rate on your website to take those offers. But that leaves 98% of people who are not going to take it. And so now the key is now we go back to the platforms that we know that through their mobile phones and through their desktops, believe it or not, there's all this hype that no one uses a desktop computer anymore. That's just not true. I see enough analytics. I can tell you that 75-80% of most of our clients' websites are still getting traffic from desktop. So, but point being is now we go back to the platform and we say, okay, we now know if we've done what I call the digital technology setup properly, right? If we've done the right work on our website, meaning we can now see who's touched our website in some way, shape, or form, we can now go back and start putting people in buckets. What I call them digital buckets. People, we may not know their name, we may not know where they're from, we may not know their age, but we just simply start putting people in buckets. And for the sake of this, you can do it on all the platforms, Google, Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, all of them. And we recommend you should set up these buckets on all of them because you don't know where your customer is all the time.
Yeah.
But we then will take in step 3 is we now use a very simple dollar per day strategy to Pete, in your marketing, your coaching, you may hear some of this. I know I hear it in my world. And that is, everyone seems to still believe that no like and trust factor matters. But yet the person visited the website, looked at one or two pages and left. If you did step two, you made an
Yep.
attempt to get an email address to start building a relationship,
Hmm.
but then you just forget about them. And the rest of their day is going to be on Facebook, Instagram, Google, YouTube,
Exactly.
etc. And yet we won't show up there to continue the dialogue. And it's just complete 180 of what we would do in a networking environment, which,
Yeah.
right? If we go to a networking event, we will
Yeah.
talk to the person until.
Yeah. Right.
So we go in step three and we go and we look at how do we set up very small, inexpensive, any business owner can afford, top of mind awareness campaigns using these audience buckets with Facebook and Instagram. And what are we doing? We're not pitching
Yeah.
them to buy something. We're not pitching them to come back and even get our thing. We are just literally trying to share our high level of expertise because they ventured to our website to try to solve a problem or they had a question on their mind.
Yeah.
And so we structure these together. And finally, Pete, step four is, of course, where we talked about earlier, which is email nurturing, not
Hmm.
to hard sell, but
Yeah.
to
Right.
actually to build a relationship, right?
Yeah.
So
Build a
core,
friend. Have a
that's it.
friend. You know,
That's it.
and when they're ready to raise their hand, you're there for them. Right.
That's the idea. And I learned this framework before the internet started. And so I started my world in direct mail. And when I was able to get a prospect who opened a piece of mail of mine and contacted my office, this is in the 90s. I'm dating
Yeah.
myself a little
Hey,
bit.
man, we both have white in our beard.
That's right. That's right. I mean, I hate to say it, but this framework really developed when I was doing stuff offline and the invitation was for them to get a free report and to really take your audience back for anybody that's under 50, under 45, we used fax machines. So you could dial into a fax machine and we would auto send this report back to your fax machine. In fact, we were doing fax machine to fax machine. I mean, it's crazy stuff, but
it's what we had to do.
It's what it was, right?
Yeah.
So that's the framework, man. It's simple, and really the methodology is really the psychology, right?
Yeah.
The steps aren't different. It's not magical. You know these steps. They're taught all over the internet. The reality is the psychology of understanding your consumer, and that's where people miss it. And then not really knowing how to go into these platforms and build the proper buckets for retargeting and remarketing, and that's where the nuance comes in.
Yeah. You know, I have a framework and I've written some stuff on it and what have you. It's called the Entrepreneurial IPA. And it goes like this: I is for ideate, P is for postulate, and A is for activate. And, you know, we can ideate about all this stuff. We can postulate and think about it. Like we were talking before we hopped on, reading books and doing all this. You don't need 6 books. You need to actually activate, right?
Yes,
and I think these 4 steps are great steps. Like you said, they aren't new steps. It's just things that, you know, people think about, but what are you doing? And I'm asking you, the listener, what are you doing to activate some of these things today? And what are you doing to put in place so that you can have an even better campaign and attract even better clients? And I think that's what we're trying to do here with the Simplifying Entrepreneurship Podcast, Darrell, is to give people some action steps that are going to make a difference for them, you know?
That's right. Absolutely. Yeah, there's enough overwhelm, there's enough distraction. The reality is we live in an amazing time technologically on Earth. I mean, literally, I wouldn't want to be anywhere else.
Love it.
And but we also can get too carried away thinking we're going to miss something if we don't do everything. And I'm a very big believer in what your topic is here in terms of simplifying. And listen, I think simplifying for me was very interesting because I didn't come from a venture funded background. I was a bootstrapped entrepreneur since my early 20s. You kind of resonate, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
I didn't have hundreds of millions of dollars coming into my enterprise, so I had to be resourceful. But at the same point to what you said earlier with your IPA formula, I took action and we say, let's do the minimal viable thing, but let's iterate after we get some result. But we can't make judgment until we get result.
I agree.
Good or bad?
Much.
Good or bad, by the way.
I agree.
Data is just
great. Go ahead.
I was just going to say one thing. I was going to say failure is nothing more than data. Data is nothing more than a result. And if we can just but we have to get into action. Back to your IPA formula. But let's get in action. Let's get some data and let's iterate, and we'll get to the life that we want, which is the freedom from simplifying our business models.
Yeah, man. Yeah, I agree. I loved our conversation here today, Darrell. And
Thanks for having me.
if absolutely, if anybody would like to get out and get in touch with you and what you do, why don't you give them a little heads up on how they can find you?
So I appreciate that. I have a podcast called the Mind Shift Podcast. Since you're listening here to Pete on his show, if you've got room for one more show, I'd love for you to pop over to the mindshiftpodcast.com, wherever you're listening to this show. If you want to venture off the podcast platforms, I'm goofing around on Instagram. My handle is at Mr. Darrell Evans, and my website is darrellevans.net.
Awesome. And I'm going to include all those in the show notes and everything too, for anybody. If you didn't get a chance to get your pen out and write all that stuff down, it'll be there in the show notes.
Appreciate it.
Well, thanks again, Darrell. It's been a pleasure. And let's try to hook up again in the near future.
Absolutely, Pete. Keep doing great work. I love what you're doing.
All right. Make it a great day.
You too.